Hey guys, tonight we begin with the rowdy, smoky, and slightly sticky world of the medieval tavern. It was the unsung heart of every town, the unofficial news centre where a knight, a farmer, and a bard could all get equally rowdy and equally lost in the crowd. It wasn't just a place to rest your feet. It was a sanctuary where danger, laughter, and the grit of the Middle Ages mingled freely beneath a thatched roof. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine you've just trudged through a muddy street that smells like a blend of wet horse, wood smoke, and questionable soup. The sun vanished hours ago, leaving the village in a darkness so thick it feels physical. In the medieval world, night isn't just the absence of light. It's a predatory force. Without street lamps or glowing shop windows, the town becomes a labyrinth of shadows and freezing rain. Your cloak is heavy, soaked through with a relentless drizzle of a late autumn evening. Every step is a battle. The street beneath your boots isn't paved. It's a churned up slurry of earth, animal waste, and household runoff. You feel the cold mud squelching over the tops of your leather shoes, a sensation that is as common to a medieval traveller as the air they breathe. The wind whistles through the narrow timber-framed houses, rattling the shutters and carrying the sharp metallic tang of the nearby blacksmith's cooling forge. You're tired, you're shivering, and more than anything, you need to find the one place in town that promises warmth. But how do you find it? In this era, there is no GPS. There are no neon signs flickering, open. Most people cannot read, so a painted sign with words would be useless to the average passerby. You have to rely on your senses and the secret language of the streets. You stop for a moment, tilting your head. Through the whistle of the wind, you hear it, a distant, muffled roar. It's the sound of 100 voices competing to be heard. It's a rhythmic, chaotic thrum that vibrates through the damp air. You follow the noise, turning a corner where the houses lean so close together they almost touch at the top, creating a tunnel of darkness. And then, you see it. Propped out over the doorway of a crooked timber and door building is a long wooden pole. It juts out into the street like a spear, and at the end of it, tied with a bit of twine, is a thick bunch of green ivy and brush. This is the ale stake. To a medieval person, this humble pole is the most beautiful sight in the world. It is the universal symbol that a fresh batch of brew is ready, and the doors are open to those with a coin to spare. The building itself seems to be groaning under its own weight. It's a structure built more on hope than architectural precision. The white plaster between the dark wooden beams is stained with soot and grime. But light, beautiful, orange, flickering light, is bleeding through the cracks in the heavy wooden shutters. As you approach the door, the sound of the crowd grows into a symphony of humanity. You hear the clatter of ceramic mugs, the barking of a dog somewhere inside, and the sudden, explosive laughter of a man who has clearly forgotten his troubles for the evening. The threshold is a transition between two worlds. Behind you is the cold, the hunger, and the silence of the medieval night. In front of you is a heavy iron-hinged door, its wood scarred by decades of boots and weather. You reach out, your fingers numb from the cold, and push. The door lets out a long, dramatic creak, a sound that serves as an unofficial announcement of your arrival. Instantly, the outside world vanishes. The biting wind is replaced by a wall of heat so sudden it makes your skin tingle. And then, the smell hits you. It's an overwhelming assault on your senses. The rich, heavy perfume of wood smoke, the sour tang of fermented grain, the scent of wet wool drying by a fire, and the savoury, salt-heavy aroma of a pottage that has been simmering for days. It isn't clean, and it isn't quiet. But as the door slams shut behind you, sealing out the dark, you realise you've made it. Welcome to the tavern. You aren't just a traveller anymore. You're a guest in the living hearts of the Middle Ages. As the heavy iron-hinged door slams shut behind you, the transition is so absolute, it feels as though you've stepped into another dimension. The silence of the muddy street is replaced by a physical wall of sound, but it's the atmosphere itself that truly arrests your progress. You stand there for a moment, blinking as your eyes begin the slow, painful process of adjusting to a world where light is a luxury and oxygen is a suggestion. The scent hits you first. A complex, layered assault that could best be described as a drunken handshake from the Middle Ages. It is a thick, humid perfume composed of wood smoke that hasn't quite found its way out of the chimney. The sharp, acidic tang of spilled ale fermenting in the floorboards, and the heavy, earthy musk of 36 unwashed bodies in various states of dampness. This isn't just a smell, it's an emotional trauma. It's the scent of survival, of a community huddled together against the cold, where the aroma of wet wool and wood ash becomes the default scent of comfort. You find yourself instinctively ducking your head, even if you aren't particularly tall. The ceiling is oppressively low, heavy oak beams sagging under the weight of the rooms above, blackened by centuries of soot until they resemble the charred ribs of some great subterranean beast. This low ceiling effect wasn't just a result of primitive architecture. It was a deliberate, if subconscious, way to trap heat. In a world without insulation, every inch of vertical space was an enemy. By keeping the ceilings low and the windows small or non-existent, the tavern keeper ensured that the warmth of the fire and the shared breath of the crowd stayed exactly where it was needed, at shoulder height. The lighting in the room is a masterpiece of shadow and orange flicker. There are no clear lines here, only silhouettes dancing against the soot-stained walls. The primary source of light is the great stone hearth at the far end of the room, where a fire of peat and damp logs roars with a stubborn, smoky defiance. Scattered across the lopsided tables are tallow candles, cheap, guttering things made of rendered animal fat. They don't so much light the room as they do create a series of small, greasy halos that smell faintly of a butcher's shop. The smoke from these candles rises to meet the smoke from the fire, swirling around the low rafters in a hazy fog that makes the far side of the room feel a mile away. As your vision clears, the tavern reveals itself as a sprawling, uneven spillage of humanity. There are no private booths here, no curated seating charts. You see a knight, his surcoat stained with the dust of the road, sharing a bench with a tanner whose clothes bear the permanent, pungent mark of his trade. They are leaning in close, their faces illuminated from below by the glow of the hearth, shouting to be heard over the din. To your left, A group of travellers is huddled over a shared jug, their cloaks still steaming as the heat of the room coaxes the moisture from the fabric. The air is thick, almost chewy, vibrating with the rhythm of a dozen simultaneous conversations. You hear the rhythmic clack of wooden mugs hitting the tables, a sound that serves as the heartbeat of the tavern. Somewhere in the shadows, a dog barks at a spilled scrap of bread, and the sound is immediately swallowed by a burst of laughter from a nearby table. Every surface seems to be in a state of soft, organic decay. The wood of the tables is polished to a high sheen by the countless elbows and sleeves that have rested there over the decades, while the stone walls are slick with a fine layer of condensation and grease. You take a tentative step forward, your boots finding purchase on a floor that feels unexpectedly soft. You look down, and in the flickering light, you see the rush floor, a thick carpet of dried straw and meadow grass that's been laid down to absorb the inevitable spills and filth of the night. It crunches beneath your weight, releasing a faint, ghostly scent of lavender and dried herbs that struggles briefly against the overwhelming smell of ale and smoke before being defeated. This is the threshold of the medieval world. It is cramped, it is dark, and it is unapologetically loud. It is a place where the social hierarchies of the outside world begin to blur in the amber glow of the firelight. Here, in the belly of the tavern, you aren't just a traveller seeking shelter. You are part of the organism. The heat of the room begins to seep through your damp cloak, settling into your bones, and despite the chaos and the sensory assault, you feel a strange, primal sense of belonging. The night is outside, the cold is outside, but here, within these soot-blackened walls, the world is alive, warm, and waiting for you to find a seat. As you take your second step into the room, your focus shifts from the overwhelming wall of heat to the ground beneath your boots. In a modern building, the floor is an afterthought, something solid, clean, and predictable. But in the medieval tavern, the floor is a living, evolving ecosystem. It is the grit factor made manifest, and it tells the true story of the night's festivities long before the first mug is even served. You look down, expecting perhaps stone or hard-packed earth, but instead, your feet sink into a thick, rustling layer of golden brown vegetation. This is the rush floor. To a newcomer, it might look almost cozy, like a stable prepared for a prized horse. But as you shift your weight, the sound it makes is a dry, hollow crunch. A sound that hides a multitude of secrets. In the Middle Ages, tavern keepers used rushes, long, grass-like plants harvested from marshes, to cover their floors. On the surface, this was an attempt at sophistication and hygiene. Fresh rushes were often mixed with handfuls of dried, strewing herbs, like lavender, woodruff, or mint. The idea was simple. As patrons walked across the floor, their boots would crush the herbs, releasing a burst of fragrance that helped mask the persistent aroma of wood smoke and unwashed bodies. It was the medieval version of an air freshener, a botanical shield against the smells of the 14th century. However, as you stand there, the reality of the rush floor begins to seep through the soles of your shoes. The problem with rushes is that they were rarely, if ever, fully cleared out. Instead of sweeping the floor, the tavern keeper would simply toss a fresh layer of straw over the old one whenever the room started to look too dingy. Beneath the top layer of relatively clean, yellow straw, lies a dark, damp history of the tavern's past several months. Erasmus, a scholar who travelled through Europe a bit later but described scenes that had remained unchanged for centuries, famously remarked on these floors with a mix of fascination and horror. Beneath the lavender and the mint, the floor becomes a graveyard of daily life. As you shuffle toward a bench, you realise the straw is hiding more than just dirt. It hides the dregs of 1,000 mugs, splashes of sour ale and wine that have soaked into the bottom layers, creating a fermentation process that never truly stops. It hides grease dripped from roasted meats, hunks of gristle, and small bone fragments tossed aside by hungry patrons who didn't bother with the concept of a trash bin. You feel something hard beneath your heel and nudge the straw aside with your toe. It's a chicken bone, polished smooth by the movement of feet, buried alongside a fragment of a broken ceramic jug. This is the true floor of secrets. If you were to dig through the layers, you'd find a stratigraphic map of the village's social life. A dropped copper coin from a merchant, a lost button from a traveller's tunic, and perhaps the occasional tooth lost in a forgotten brawl. The hygiene, or lack thereof, is what keeps the tavern real. In the flickering light, the straw looks soft, but it is actually a harbour for the uninvited guests of the tavern. Fleas, lice, and mice consider the rush floor a luxury estate. The warmth of the hearth and the constant supply of dropped food scraps make the floor a buzzing, scurrying landscape of its own. You notice a tavern cat prowling near the edge of the shadows, its eyes fixed on a particular patch of rustling straw. It isn't just a pet. It's the tavern's primary defence against the ecosystem living beneath your feet. There's a specific dampness to the floor near the bar. The straw here is darker, heavier, and has a rhythmic squelch to it. This is the spill zone, where the tavern keeper's haste meets the patron's clumsiness. The smell here changes. The lavender is long gone, replaced by a pungent yeasty odour that reminds you that in this world, nothing is ever truly clean. It is merely covered up. Yet, despite the hidden filth, there is something remarkably practical about it. The rushes provide a layer of insulation against the freezing earth or stone below. They dampen the noise of a rowdy crowd, turning the sharp clatter of boots into a muffled, earthy thrum. And for the man who has had one too many ales and finds himself sliding off his bench at midnight, the straw provides a much softer landing than cold, hard granite. As you finally reach an open bench, you take care where you place your feet. You've learned the first rule of the medieval interior: never trust the surface. The tavern is a place of layers. Layers of smoke in the air, layers of history on the walls, and layers of secrets beneath the straw. You settle in, the dry rustle of the rushes settling around your boots like a whisper, and you realise that the grit isn't just a side effect of the era, it's the very foundation of the experience. The tavern doesn't pretend to be a palace, it is honest. It is a place of bone fragments and spilled ale, of lavender and mice, of warmth and decay. And as you prepare to call for your first drink, you find that the grit factor doesn't push you away, it grounds you. It reminds you that you are in a world of physical realities, where every comfort is earned and every secret is buried just beneath the straw. In the flickering half-light of the tavern, among the swirling eddies of wood smoke and the rhythmic crunch of the rush floor, stands the true axis upon which this entire chaotic world turns. Every kingdom has its king, and every village has its lord. But within these four soot-stained walls, there is only one ultimate authority. You look toward the heavy wooden plank that serves as the bar, and there they are, the tavern keeper. The vibe of a medieval tavern keeper is a physical manifestation of the job itself. Sturdy, weathered, and entirely immovable. If the keeper is a man, he is often built like the very barrels he hauls, with shoulders widened by decades of lifting heavy tons and a face lined by the heat of the hearth. If the keeper is a woman, and in the Middle Ages, alewives or brewsters were incredibly common and powerful figures, she is likely a woman of formidable presence and a tongue sharper than a blacksmith's file. Whether man or woman, the tavern keeper is a person who has seen every human emotion and every possible social disaster by the time the sun goes down, and as a result, they possess a gaze that can stop a brawl before a single stool is lifted. To understand the tavern keeper is to understand that they are far more than a simple server of drinks. In an era where information travels at the speed of a walking horse, the tavern keeper is the town's primary news hub. They are the gatekeepers of gossip and the curators of local history. Every traveller who pushes open that creaking door brings a tax of information. A merchant from the coast mentions a rise in salt prices. A pilgrim whispers of a new saint's shrine. 3 counties over, a soldier grumbles about troop movements on the southern border. The keeper collects these fragments, assembles them, and redistributes them to the locals. If you want to know who is in debt, who is looking for work, or which roads are currently infested with bandits, you don't look for a town crier. You talk to the person behind the bar. But their influence goes even deeper into the practical machinery of the village. The tavern keeper is often the unofficial banker for the community. In a world where many people don't have a secure place to store their meagre savings, and where formal banks are a distant concept reserved for Italian merchants or the nobility, the tavern keeper's strongbox becomes a place of trust. They hold onto coins for regular patrons, manage tabs that might span entire seasons, and sometimes provide small loans to help a farmer get through a dry spell. This financial power gives them an incredible level of social leverage. Everyone owes the tavern keeper something, be it a silver penny or a debt of gratitude, and that makes them a figure you dare not cross. The bar itself, often just a thick scarred slab of oak resting on 2 sturdy barrels, serves as their pulpit and their fortress. Behind it, they perform a constant, exhausting dance of multitasking. You watch as they fill a series of heavy clay mugs with one hand, while with the other, they settle a dispute between 2 farmers over a boundary line. They manage the ledger of the room entirely in their head, remembering exactly who is on their 3rd mug and who hasn't paid for their first. In a time when literacy is rare, the tavern keeper's memory is a terrifyingly efficient tool. They can recall a slight from 3 market days ago with the same clarity as the order for the group currently sitting by the fire. Perhaps their most vital role, however, is that of the social arbiter. In a medieval tavern, where spirits are high and the ale is strong, the line between a good time and a violent riot is paper thin. The tavern keeper is the one who decides exactly where that line is drawn. They have a 6th sense for the temperature of the room. They know the difference between the loud, boisterous laughter of friends and the sharp, jagged edge of a brewing argument. They are the ones who decide when a patron has had enough, not necessarily out of a sense of moral duty, but out of a practical need to protect their furniture and their reputation. When the tavern keeper tells you to sit down and eat some bread, it isn't a suggestion. It is a command from the ruler of the realm. They are also the protectors of the house. The tavern is their livelihood, and in many cases, their actual home. This means they are the first line of defense against the unwelcome elements of the night. They have a club or a heavy ladle tucked beneath the counter, but more often than not, they rely on the sheer force of their personality. There is a certain dignity to the way they move, a calm in the eye of the storm. They move through the crowded benches like a ship cutting through a choppy sea, clearing away empty bowls and slapping backs with a hand that feels like it's made of solid oak. As you sit there, watching the keeper navigate the room, you realise that the tavern is an ecosystem, and they are the sun at its centre. They provide the warmth, the sustenance, and the light, but they also dictate the seasons of the night. They are a counsellor to the heartbroken, a judge to the dishonest, and a friend to the lonely traveller. Without them, the tavern would just be a cold building full of strangers. With them, it is a living, breathing community. You catch their eye and raise a hand. They don't smile. Tavern keepers rarely do during the peak of the rush. But they give a short, efficient nod that says, "I see you. I know you're hungry, and you'll get your turn." It is a small moment, but it makes you feel secure. In the vast, dark uncertainty of the Middle Ages, the tavern keeper is a constant. They are the guardian of the hearth, the keeper of the secrets, and the undisputed ruler of this small, smoky kingdom. As you settle onto your bench, the tavern keeper finally slides a vessel toward you. It isn't the crystal clear, clinking glass you might expect in a modern establishment. Instead, it is a heavy, thumb-pitted tankard made of carved wood or thick, greyish clay. You reach out, your fingers curling around the rough handle, and you feel the weight of medieval life itself. This is the moment of truth. You peer over the rim, and the first thing you notice is that the liquid is completely opaque. The vibe of a medieval beverage is a far cry from the filtered, carbonated, and ice-cold drinks of today. What you are holding is thick, cloudy, and decidedly lukewarm. In a world without refrigeration, cold only happens in the winter, and hot requires a fire. Most drinks exist in a permanent state of room temperature, which, in a drafty tavern, means a dull, cellar-cool dampness. There are floaties dancing on the surface, tiny husks of grain, bits of yeast, or perhaps a stray piece of straw from the floor. To the medieval eye, this isn't a sign of a dirty kitchen. It's a sign of sustenance. Before you take a sip, you might wonder, why not just ask for a glass of water? In the modern world, water is the default of health. But in the Middle Ages, water is an act of bravery that most are unwilling to perform. It isn't that people didn't understand that dirty water made you sick. They could see the proximity of town tanneries, latrines, and animal pens to the local wells. They knew that the invisible death lived in the standing pools of the village. Boiling water was an option, but fuel was expensive and time-consuming. Instead, the medieval solution was a masterpiece of accidental chemistry, fermentation. The process of brewing ale effectively killed off many of the pathogens that made raw water so deadly. In a very literal sense, the tavern was the only place in town where you could hydrate with a relative degree of safety. The mainstay of the tavern, the fuel that runs the village, is ale. But ale in the 14th century is a broad spectrum. On one end, you have small ale. This is a weak, low-potency brew, made from the second or third runnings of the grain. It is essentially the leftovers of the brewing process. Small ale is consumed like water. It is served at breakfast, taken into the fields by labourers, and given to children. Because the brewing process involves boiling the wort, it is safe, and the low sugar content means it provides hydration and calories without the heavy fog of intoxication. It is the sports drink of the medieval world. On the other end of the spectrum is the strong ale, the brew that the tavern keeper saves for the dark hours of the evening. This is thick, yeasty, and remarkably filling. In this era, ale is often referred to as liquid bread. It is unfiltered and packed with nutrients. A few mugs of this aren't just a social lubricant. They are a significant portion of a person's daily caloric intake. It tastes of roasted barley, earthy herbs, and a strange, sweet funk. It doesn't have the crisp bite of modern hops, which wouldn't become the standard for another couple of centuries. Instead, it is flavoured with gruit, a secret blend of local herbs like bog myrtle, yarrow, and rosemary. However, drinking in a medieval tavern comes with a grit factor of its own, the risk of the brew being off or adulterated. Brewing was an inconsistent science. A batch of ale could easily turn sour or ropey, developing a thick, slimy texture if the barrels weren't cleaned properly or if the weather shifted too quickly. A dishonest tavern keeper might try to hide the taste of spoiled ale by adding heavy spices, soot, or even salt to make the patron thirstier. There are laws, of course. The ale tasters are town officials who roam from tavern to tavern, literally sitting in a puddle of ale in leather breeches to see if the sugar content makes their pants stick to the bench. But oversight is thin. You sniff your mug cautiously, looking for that telltale vinegary sting that says the barrel has turned. Then there are the alternatives. If you are in a region with orchards, you might be served cider. Like ale, medieval cider is a wild, unpredictable beast. It's made from pressed crab apples or pears, known as perry, fermented in the cool dark of a cellar. It is sharp, tangy, and can vary from bone-dry to cloyingly sweet. It has a way of creeping up on a traveller, its fruitiness masking a potency that can leave a grown man singing to his boots by midnight. If you are a person of means, perhaps a travelling merchant or a minor cleric, you might call for wine. But unless you are in the sun-drenched valleys of France or Italy, wine is a luxury import. It arrives in heavy wooden tuns, often having survived a harrowing sea voyage or a long trek across muddy roads. By the time it reaches a village tavern, it is often tired. It is prone to oxidation, turning a dull, brick-brown colour. To save it, the tavern keeper might mix it with honey and spices like cinnamon and cloves to create hippocras. It is served warm, a spicy, syrupy concoction that feels like a hug in a mug, designed to hide the fact that the wine underneath has seen better days. As you take your first cautious sip of the house ale, you find it is surprisingly palatable. It has a heavy, cereal-like sweetness and a creamy mouthfeel. It isn't refreshing in the way a cold soda is, but it is deeply satisfying. It warms your throat and settles in your stomach like a heavy blanket. You look around the room and see the communal nature of the drink. You see two men sharing a loving cup, a large two-handled vessel passed back and forth as a sign of a truce. You see the tavern keeper refilling a traveller's leather jack, a rugged, wax-lined pouch that won't break on the road. The mug is the great equalizer. Whether it contains the weak small ale of a peasant or the spiced wine of a visitor, the act of raising it is the universal gesture of the tavern. In this world, the drink is your shield against the parasites of the river and the chill of the night. It is your medicine, your meal, and your social passport. You set the mug back down on the scarred wood of the table, a ring of foam clinging to the rim, and you feel the first gentle softening of the world around you. The shadows don't seem quite so dark, the smoke doesn't seem quite so thick, and the stranger sitting at the end of your bench suddenly looks like someone with a very interesting story to tell. As the ale begins to warm your blood, your stomach lets out a treacherous growl, reminded of the day's long miles and the meagre crust of bread you finished hours ago. In a modern restaurant, this is the moment you would reach for a menu, weighing the merits of poultry versus fish, or debating the seasoning of a steak. But in the medieval tavern, there is no menu. There is no choice. There is only the cauldron. You look toward the hearth, the massive stone fireplace that dominates the far wall. Hanging from a blackened iron crane over the dancing flames is a heavy, soot-encrusted pot. It is the size of a small barrel, steam rising from its lip in a thick, savoury cloud that weaves through the wood smoke. This is the source of the tavern's sustenance, the perpetual pottage. The vibe of medieval dining is one of hot, salt-heavy mystery. The air near the hearth is dense with the aroma of slow-cooked grains, earthy vegetables, and the unmistakable, deep scent of long-simmered bone broth. It is a smell that is at once comforting and slightly intimidating. In this era, food is not a hobby or an aesthetic experience. It is a fuel, and in the tavern, that fuel is whatever happens to be in the pot at the exact moment you arrive. The perpetual pottage is exactly what the name implies. A stew that, in theory, never truly ends. The tavern keeper does not empty the pot and scrub it clean every night. Instead, they simply keep it simmering at the edge of the fire. As the day progresses and hungry travellers dip their wooden bowls into the mix, the level drops. To compensate, the keeper adds whatever is on hand. A handful of dried peas, a bunch of leeks from the garden, a bit of salt pork, or some barley to thicken the broth. The pot is a living culinary time capsule. The broth you are eating tonight may contain the essence of a rabbit added on Tuesday, the starch of oats added on Wednesday, and the seasoning of herbs gathered just this afternoon. This method of cooking was born of absolute necessity. Fuel for fires was a significant expense, and keeping a pot simmering was more efficient than starting from scratch multiple times a day. Furthermore, the constant heat served as a primitive form of food safety. By keeping the pottage at a low, continuous boil, the tavern keeper ensured that the mystery within remained safe to eat, even if the individual ingredients were of varying ages. The tavern keeper notices your lingering gaze and, without a word, retrieves a wide, shallow bowl carved from a single piece of maple. They reach for a long-handled wooden ladle and plunge it deep into the cauldron, stirring the thick, bubbling contents. You watch the surface break, revealing a swirling landscape of grey-green peas. translucent onions, and the occasional dark, fibrous chunk of what you hope is beef. The ladle hits the bottom of your bowl with a heavy, wet thwack. There are no napkins here, no silver forks. You are handed a coarse, dark piece of trench bread. Bread baked so hard and dense that it serves as both a plate and a utensil. This bread is the trencher, designed to soak up the juices of the stew without disintegrating. You are expected to use your own knife, which every traveller carries at their belt, and your fingers to navigate the meal. As the bowl is placed before you, the grit factor becomes a physical reality. The pottage is piping hot, but it is also incredibly salt heavy. Salt was the primary preservative of the age, used to keep meat from spoiling and to add flavour to the otherwise bland grains. The first spoonful hits your tongue with a briny punch that makes you reach instinctively for your ale. The texture is thick and gelatinous, the result of hours or days of the grains breaking down into a hearty sludge. But as you eat, the mystery begins to unravel. You find a piece of parsnip, softened until it almost melts. You encounter a bit of salt bacon, chewy and intense. Every spoonful is a gamble. Sometimes you get a rich, meaty bite. Sometimes you get a mouthful of hulls and peas. In the dim, flickering light, you stop trying to identify the individual components and simply surrender to the warmth. It is the tavern's taste, a flavour that cannot be replicated because it is the product of a specific hearth, a specific pot, and a specific week's worth of leftovers. There is a communal intimacy to this meal. You look down the bench and see a carter dipping his bread into the same pot's bounty, his face reflecting the same orange glow of the fire. You aren't eating a dish. You are participating in the village's collective survival. The pottage is the great leveller. Whether you are a wealthy merchant or a common labourer, you are eating from the same eternal cauldron, flavoured by the same soot and salt. The meal is heavy, settling in your stomach like a warm stone. It provides the slow-burning energy needed to combat the damp cold of the medieval night. As you use the last of your bread to scrape the bottom of the wooden bowl, picking up the stray grains and the thickened remains of the broth, you feel a deep, primitive satisfaction. It wasn't the meal you chose, but it was the meal you needed. The tavern keeper takes your empty bowl with a nod of approval. They don't ask how it was. The empty wood speaks for itself. They turn back to the hearth, tossing a few more carrots and a scoop of cracked wheat into the pot for the travellers who will arrive in an hour. The cycle continues. The fire pops. The steam rises, and the perpetual pottage simmers on, waiting for the next hungry soul to push through the door. As the last traces of the perpetual pottage vanish from your bowl, the tavern undergoes a subtle shift. The initial frantic rush of hungry travellers seeking immediate survival begins to mellow, replaced by the restless energy of the late evening. The air, already thick with smoke, now vibrates with a new sound, the rhythmic, sharp clatter of bone against wood. This is the hour of the game, the time when the tavern transforms into the social media of the medieval world. The vibe is one of high stakes and hushed intensity. In a corner where the candlelight struggles to penetrate the soot, a group of men is hunched over a scarred table. Their shadows loom large and distorted against the timber-framed walls. You hear the rattling of dice in a leather cup, a dry, skeletal sound, followed by a sudden silence as they are cast. These aren't the plastic balanced dice of the modern era. These are bones, often carved from the knuckles of sheep or cows, slightly lopsided and weighted by nothing but chance and the grit of the tavern floor. In this space, games are more than mere entertainment. For the medieval mind, they are a flirtation with fortune, the fickle goddess who turns her wheel without regard for a man's status. But more importantly, the gaming table is where the world building happens. Between the throws of the dice and the shuffling of crude, hand-painted cards, the real currency of the tavern is exchanged. Gossip. The tavern is the central nervous system of the kingdom. Because there are no newspapers and no official bulletins reaching the rural villages, information flows through these rooms like a river. As you listen, you realize that the man playing dice across from you isn't just a stranger. He is a carrier of news from 3 counties over. You hear hushed whispers about a local lord who has fallen out of favour with the crown, or rumours of a mysterious, sweating sickness that has closed the gates of a distant port city. A traveller might mention a new tax being whispered about in the capital, or the sighting of a great beast in the northern woods. This information is unverified, often exaggerated, and filtered through the fog of ale. But it is the only way the average person understands the world beyond their own fields. The tavern is where a peasant learns that a king has died, or that a war has begun, long before the official messengers ever arrive. However, there is a reason this chapter is called Dicing with Danger. In the medieval world, the line between a friendly competition and a violent confrontation is incredibly thin. The grit factor of tavern life is most apparent when the games go sour. Gambling was a pervasive part of life, but it was also a source of immense friction. When a man has spent his last copper on a throw of the dice, and he suspects the bones are loaded, or if a simple misunderstanding arises in the heat of a win, the atmosphere of the room can turn from jovial to lethal in the blink of an eye. This is the era of the flying stools. The furniture in a tavern isn't bolted down. The heavy oak benches and 3-legged stools are designed for utility, but they double as formidable weapons when a dispute erupts. You notice the tavern keeper's hand moving toward a heavy wooden baton beneath the bar the moment a voice rises too high. A tavern brawl in the 14th century isn't a choreographed movie fight. It is a chaotic, desperate scramble in the dark. It involves the smashing of ceramic mugs, the overturning of tables, and the frantic rustle of the rush floor as patrons scramble to stay out of the way. The danger isn't just physical, it's social. To be caught in a tavern brawl could mean a night in the village stocks, or a heavy fine that could ruin a family's winter stores. Yet, despite the risk, the games continue. The allure of the big win, or the simple need to forget the crushing weight of medieval labour, is too strong to resist. As you watch the dice roll across the table, you see the desperation and the hope in the players' eyes. To them, this isn't just a game. It is a moment of agency in a world where they have very little. For a few minutes, their fate isn't decided by the seasons or the lord of the manor, but by the way a piece of bone lands on a piece of oak. The whispers continue around you, a tapestry of rumours and lies that form the news of the day. You hear of a merchant who was robbed on the forest road, and a young woman who claims to have seen a vision in the well. It is a messy, unorganised, and dangerous way to learn about the world. But as you sit in the amber glow of the hearth, you realise it is also deeply human. The tavern is a place where secrets are bought with a mug of ale, and where a man's reputation can be made or destroyed over a game of hazard. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, listening to the rhythmic clack-clack of the dice, feeling the strange, electric tension of a room where everyone is looking for an edge, a story, or a way to survive the night. The roar of the night has faded into a ghostly, rhythmic silence. The fire that once crackled with such defiance has retreated into a bed of grey, pulsating embers, casting just enough heat to keep the chill at the edges of the room. You wake slowly, not to the sound of an alarm, but to the pale, uncompromising light of dawn filtering through the cracks in the wooden shutters. The vibe of the morning after is a stark reality check. The air, which felt so warm and inviting just hours ago, now feels heavy and stale. The thick veil of wood smoke has settled into a low-hanging fog near the rafters, and the floor, once hidden by the golden promise of fresh straw, now reveals the aftermath of the evening. In the grey light, you see the spilled ale, the gnawed bones, and the muddy footprints of a dozen different lives, all frozen in the quiet of the morning. Your head thrums with a dull, rhythmic ache, a reminder of the strong house ale and the lack of sleep. You sit up on the hard wooden bench, your muscles stiff from the awkward positions required to find rest in a room that never truly stops moving. This is the moment of the inventory. Before you even stand, your hand goes instinctively to your belt. You check your purse, feeling the reassuring weight of your remaining copper coins. In a place where the social media of gossip and dice rules the night, losing your livelihood is a constant threat. You feel the rough leather of your boots, searching for them in the dimness beneath the table, and as you pull them on, you realize they are still damp from the previous day's journey. There is no music now, no shouting, only the sound of a broom pushing old straw into a heap, and the splashing of water as the cauldron is prepared for the morning's first batch of small ale. As you prepare to leave, you look around one last time. In the cold light of day, the tavern looks smaller, grittier, and perhaps a bit more fragile. You see the stains on the walls and the deep scars in the table where someone's knife slipped during an argument. But you also realize something that the darkness of the night had obscured. Despite the dirt, the smoke, and the occasional danger, this was the only place in the medieval world where everyone was truly equal. For a few hours, the rigid hierarchies of the outside world, the lords, the peasants, the merchants, and the monks, all dissolved into the same amber glow. Everyone breathed the same smoky air, drank from the same clay mugs, and shared the same perpetual pottage. In the tavern, a man was judged not by the land he owned, but by the stories he told and the way he handled his dice. It was a chaotic, dirty sanctuary, but it was a sanctuary nonetheless. You wrap your cloak tightly around you, feeling the weight of the damp wool. You push open the heavy door, and the creak that sounded like a welcome last night now sounds like a farewell. The outside air is bitingly cold and smells of wet earth and frost. The street is still a labyrinth of mud, and the village is just beginning to stir. But as you step out into the pale morning, you carry the warmth of the hearth with you. The journey continues. The roads are long, the work is hard, and the winter is coming. But for one night, you were part of the heartbeat of the Middle Ages. You were safe from the darkness, fed by the pot and entertained by the shadows. The world is waking up, and it's time for us to find our own rest. As the image of the flickering hearth fades and the sounds of the medieval street drift away into the distance, let yourself sink deeper into your pillows. The fire has gone out, the doors are locked, and the tavern is quiet at last. Sleep well. Good night.